Hello girls, we are going to learn today about the what do you mean by the burden of public debt. Burden of public debt. So why it is considered as a burden? So public debt constitutes the financial obligation or liabilities of the government. Okay, so it is a financial obligation or the liabilities of the government. It has to be paid back by the government. That's why it is called a financial obligation. Now, when we say public debt, burden of public debt, how do you measure this public debt? So, debt burden is measured as a ratio of the outstanding debt to GNP, or this is called a debt liability ratio. So, liability, right? Debt liability ratio. So, how do you measure it? It is measured as a ratio of outstanding debt to GNP. So, the formula is that debt liability ആണ് കേട്ടോ ഡെറ്റ് liability ratio, debt liabilities, okay, debt liability is equal to outstanding debt divided by GNP. So what does it mean? In the out of GNP, how much is the total debt? That is a debt liability ratio or debt obligation of the government. Now, why it is considered as a burden? So, burden of public debt consists of the sacrifice that the taxpayer have to make for financial repayment of principal and the interest. Okay. So, what is the burden of why it is considered as a burden, or what is a burden of public debt? The burden of public debt consists of the sacrifice that taxpayer have to make for the financial repayment of principal and the interest. So, in order to repay the principal and the interest, the taxpayers have to make some sacrifice. That means they have to give more tax to the government for the purpose of the repayment of the debt, and that is considered as the burden of public debt. Now, burden of internal, there is also burden of internal debt and also burden of external debt. So, burden of internal debt, as you know what is internal debt, right? So, it increases the inequality. Burden of internal debt, it increases the inequality. Why? Because there is a purchasing power transfers from poor to rich. Purchasing power transfer from poor to rich. How come? Because when the government imposes taxes, okay, for the purpose of repayment of the debt, especially internal debt, who is getting the benefit? The persons who have taken the loan, given the loan, they are getting the benefit. So, taxing the poor people, that means those who cannot uh, take a government bond for the purpose of debt, they are also taxed in order to repay the debt, right? So there is a transfer of purchasing power from poor to rich, and it adversely affects the ability and desire to work, save, and invest. So, the burden of public debt, because there is a transfer of purchasing power from poor to richer, it adversely affects the ability and desire to work, save, and invest. And then also another problem also is there. There's a transfer of purchasing power from young to older generation, from young to older generation, because who is paying the debt? The present ones. If the debt is for longer period, what happens? Who has to who is taxed more? The present generation is taxed. So there is a for the repayment of debt, the present generation is taxed, right? So there is a transfer of purchasing power from young to the older generation. That is the meaning of that. Then that is a burden of even the productive debt. What about unproductive debt? Burden of unproductive debt is not self-liquidating, right? We have already seen because it cannot raise any income. It's not a use for creating assets in the society, but it is used for unproductive purposes. So it is not self-liquidating. So as a result, it reduces private investment. It reduces private investment because debt is utilized for the loan is utilized unproductively. So that money is already gone for unproductive purposes. So it reduces the private investment. Now let us see what are the burden of external debt. That is a debt incurred from the foreign countries, from foreign institutions and foreigners. So there is something called a direct money burden, direct real burden, indirect money burden and indirect real burden. Okay. Now what is direct money burden? The size of the burden would depend on the rate of interest and the amount of loan incurred. So there's a direct money burden on the society. In what way? And the size of the burden would depend upon the rate of interest and the amount of loan incurred from foreign countries. The rate of interest is high, and also there's also another problem is there because if the exchange rate fluctuates, there's a problem here. Exchange rates fluctuates. For example, if for the borrowing time from India borrowing time, the exchange rate is suppose 60 rupees, and if the India government borrows um, um, suppose $10, so they have to pay back in terms of Indian rupees, that is 60 into 10 is equal to 600 rupees in terms of Indian rupee. Suppose the exchange rate of one Indian rupee, 1 rupee is equal to $100. Suppose, then by the time of repayment, how much they have to pay? 1,000 rupees, right? So this is how the money burden increases in terms of external debt, and that money burden depends upon the rate of interest, how much rate of interest, and also the amount of the loan incurred. What is direct real burden? It is measured in terms of loss of welfare suffered by people of the debtor country due to the repayment of debt. Now suppose the money is put aside, the money is taken from the people and it is spent for the repayment of debt. That money could have been utilized for the welfare of the people, right? So there is a direct real burden, that is the loss of welfare suffered by people of the debtor country due to the repayment of debt. Then you have indirect money burden and indirect real burden. So this is measured in terms of effect on the production and allocation of resources. So money that could have been utilized for the increase in production allocation of resources, and as a result of that, the society's welfare can be increased. That is already gone. That is why it's said it is it is measured in terms of effect on the production and allocation of resources. Okay. Then that is a burden of the productive debt. What is the burden of unproductive foreign debt? The magnitude depends upon whether the debt is incurred for productive purpose or unproductive purpose. If incurred for unproductive purpose, it will create greater burden on the community. Greater burden on the community because it's unable to repay the debt at all. So because it's already spent for unproductive purposes. So another problem is foreign currency burden increases, which means foreign currency burden increases means for the foreign currency exchange rate also changes, right? So the foreign currency burden also currency burden increases. Okay, because of these reasons, management of public debt is very important, or repayment of public debt also is very important. So in the next class we will be learning what are the methods that are adopted by the government to repay the debt, and then another class you will learn how to manage the public debt of